Right now, without even thinking about it, your hand knows exactly where the toilet paper is. It's probably the single most automatic motion your body performs all day. Now imagine reaching for that same spot and finding three seashells sitting there instead. No paper, no instructions. Just three shells sitting there, judging you silently. That's an actual scene from a movie about the future, and 30 years later, nobody has ever explained how it's supposed to work. Do you hold one in each hand? Is there a technique nobody's teaching you? Is there a wrong way to do it that quietly ends your social life? Not the characters, not the writers, not the internet in 30 straight years of asking. So today, we're finally answering it. We're answering it with something way weirder and way older. Because it turns out, somewhere in the last few 100,000 years, actual humans faced this same problem, with this same wait, seriously, how energy, no manual included anywhere, and they had to figure it out completely from scratch, using nothing but whatever happened to be lying around them. So, what did they actually use? And more importantly, does the real answer to how do three seashells even work already exist somewhere in our own history, just waiting to be pieced back together? Let's go find out. Picture this. You're one of the very first humans ever to walk this earth. Nobody taught you this. There's no older sibling to ask, no group chat, no elder standing there going, here's how we do it. You're just standing there, dealing with a problem every single human who has ever lived has faced, and you have to solve it with whatever's lying around. That's it. That's the whole assignment. And for a couple 100,000 years, that's exactly what happened over and over in every corner of the planet, with wildly different results depending on where you happen to be born. Let's start somewhere kind of funny. Colonial America, a few hundred years back. Corn was absolutely everywhere, growing in nearly every backyard, and once you'd eaten the actual kernels, you were left holding the cob, which happens to be roughly finger-shaped, slightly rough on the surface, and conveniently completely disposable. So people just used it, grabbed the dried cob, and got to work. No further discussion needed. And yes, I know exactly where your brain just went with roughly finger-shaped. I saw it happen. I can't prove it, but I saw it. Moving on. Some old rural outhouses in America apparently still have a little basket of corn cobs sitting right there next to the seat, hanging on as a piece of living history, which is either kind of charming or deeply upsetting depending entirely on your personality. So next time you're at a barbecue politely nibbling corn off the cob, just know your ancestors looked at that same object and saw two completely different uses for it, and only one of them involved eating. Now, here's one that might be one of the pettiest things humans have ever collectively done. In ancient Greece, people would sometimes clean themselves using broken pieces of pottery called Pessoi. Totally normal so far. Nothing weird yet. Yeah, sit with that for a second. Broken pottery on your most sensitive area. Historical records are unfortunately not kind here. They note this method came with a real risk of skin irritation and, well, hemorrhoids. So if you were hoping this story had a safe, wholesome ending, it did not. It got worse than you were picturing, not better. Except sometimes, before actually using the pottery shard, they'd scratch the name of somebody they really deeply hated onto it first. A political rival, an annoying neighbor, somebody who talked way too much at the agora and never stopped. Then they'd use it. On purpose, as a very specific, very targeted insult. Historians even think this is directly connected to the word ostracized, which literally comes from those broken pottery pieces called ostraca, originally used for voting people out of the city. So somewhere out there, roughly 2,500 years ago, someone settled a personal grudge in the most petty, disrespectful, and frankly self-destructive way physically possible, and society just quietly let the whole concept become part of the language forever. Next time someone says they're ostracizing you, just know the original version of that word was way, way ruder than getting left out of a group chat. Now, here's one that should probably come with a warning label. Out on the American frontier, settlers and cowboys had a go-to plant they actually nicknamed, and I promise you this is a real historical name: cowboy toilet paper. It's officially called Mullein, a big fuzzy-leafed plant that grows practically everywhere along roadsides, soft enough that people specifically sought it out for exactly this purpose throughout the 1800s. And look, I have to say this part out loud because if I don't, someone's going to say it for me. If you've ever stood in a field trying to identify a soft, innocent looking leaf without actually knowing your plants, please, for the love of everything, don't grab the wrong one. Poison ivy exists. It is also technically a leaf. It does not forgive mistakes, and it does not care how confident you felt in the moment. History doesn't record exactly how many people learned this lesson the hard way, but statistically, it was probably more than zero. And no, before you ask, there's no historical record anywhere of anyone chasing down a live rabbit for this. We checked. We're going to go ahead and let that idea stay exactly where it belongs, which is nowhere. So next time you're mildly annoyed about running out of toilet paper mid-roll, just remember that somewhere out there, someone's entire safety protocol for this exact situation was correctly identify the plant first or else. And now, finally back to the beach, which is really where this whole thing started. Because coastal cultures around the world, in completely different corners of the planet, with zero contact with each other and thousands of miles between them, all independently landed on the same solution anyway. Seashells. Actual, real seashells. Oyster shells and clam shells. Picked straight off the sand and put immediately to work. Multiple historical accounts confirm this wasn't some rare, isolated one-off thing either. It shows up again and again wherever people happen to live close to the water, completely independently on totally separate continents. Which means, hang on, wait, go back to that movie joke for a second. 3 seashells. No explanation given, ever. But if you lived anywhere near a coastline a few thousand years ago, you already knew exactly how that would work, because your ancestors were already doing it. Maybe one shell for the actual job, maybe a second one for a rinse if you were lucky enough to have water nearby, maybe a third for, honestly, we don't fully know and neither did the movie, so we're even. Nobody's run a proper study confirming the exact 3-step method, obviously, but the raw materials and the logic line up almost too well to be a coincidence. So here's the twist, and it's a genuinely good one. That joke wasn't some completely random, meaningless future gag the writers just pulled out of thin air for a cheap laugh. It was entirely by accident, historically accurate. The future in that movie wasn't inventing anything new at all. It was just quietly, unknowingly doing exactly what your actual ancestors had already figured out. Standing on a beach somewhere thousands of years ago, holding a shell, working with whatever the tide happened to wash up for free that day. Somewhere, a Hollywood screenwriter accidentally reinvented a 100,000-year-old beach routine, got laughed at for it for 30 straight years, and never even knew he was right. And that's really the whole point buried in here. We love to imagine the future as this sleek, mysterious, unexplainable place, full of gadgets nobody bothers to explain, like 3 seashells with 0 instructions attached to them. But if you actually rewind instead of fast forward, the real history of this same problem looks the same way. No teacher standing there explaining it, no manual, no committee meeting to vote on the best method. Just humans, generation after generation, quietly figuring it out. One weird, resourceful, occasionally deeply petty solution at a time. We spent 30 years laughing at a joke about the future not knowing how to explain itself. Turns out the past never explained itself either. It just worked it out, shell by shell, cob by cob, quietly, invisibly, for a few 100,000 years straight, and somehow, all of us are still standing here today because of it. If you've ever wondered what other everyday, obvious things your ancestors were quietly, brilliantly improvising their way through, that's basically the whole reason this channel exists. Hit subscribe because next time we're digging into something you definitely take for granted too.